The Denver Broncos have signed 16 players to their practice squad, including a couple of new faces. So, without further ado, guys, here is the Denver Broncos practice squad as of August 30th at 12:15 p.m. That's when I'm recording this. So, we've got Ben DiNucci, who was able to clear waivers. He is back as our third quarterback on the practice squad. I wouldn't be surprised if later on down the line in the season, especially if we're in playoff contention, the Broncos could promote Ben DiNucci to the active roster and use him for the league's third quarterback rule. Your quarterback has to be on the active roster in order to take advantage of that rule. So I would not be surprised at all if that was the long-term plan for Ben DiNucci. At running back, things got a little bit interesting. So down here in my notes, running back Tony Jones Jr. decided not to re-sign with the Broncos practice squad. Instead, he went back to his old team and signed with the Saints practice squad. So that means the Broncos decided to bring back both Tyler Beatty and Dwayne Washington onto the practice squad at running back. Tyler Beatty definitely was looking like he was going to make the active roster at various points throughout the training camp, especially early in training camp, but Jaleel McLaughlin usurped him on the active roster. Beatty's injury certainly didn't help things. He kind of had a lackluster game against the Los Angeles Rams, but the good news for Beatty there was that Tony Jones ended up getting poached, because if that didn't happen, then I strongly feel like Tyler Beatty would not have come back. Dwayne Washington, he's somebody who could bring some special teams experience if we were to ever call him up from the practice squad, so that's definitely an option there. Now, before we get into the wide receiver position, I do want to talk about practice squad elevations, because the team is allowed to elevate 2 players each week from the practice squad. Those players would then revert back to the practice squad from the 53-man roster after game day. A player can be elevated from the practice squad up to 3 times per season. After that point, if the Broncos were to want to bring them onto the active roster again, they would just have to sign them off the practice squad and onto the active roster, because they would then be out of elevations at that point in time. So I feel like that's why the Broncos are only going into the season right now with 3 healthy wide receivers on the active roster, and then 4 if you count Jerry Jeudy. So right now, I feel like it's pretty strong that the Broncos are going to use both of their practice squad elevations pretty early in the season on wide receivers. So we signed David Sills here. He's a former Giants wide receiver. He's somebody who can bring special teams value. He doesn't have a whole lot of highlight level plays on his career. He does have a couple, but this is an addition that's mostly predicated around special teams, I feel like. Good depth there, but they also brought in Philip Dorsett. It was initially reported that Dorsett had signed with the 53-man roster, but Mike Klis later clarified that they're bringing him onto the practice squad. I definitely feel a lot better about bringing Dorsett in as a reserve depth option if it's just on the practice squad. I was not pleased about bringing him onto the active roster while little Jordan Humphrey, who played really well in training camp in the preseason, is sitting here on the practice squad. But I feel like little Jordan Humphrey, he's going to be elevated on game day, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was David Sills that got elevated for certain game days because of his special teams value. And then we've got Michael Bandy. He's got familiarity with Joe Lombardi, our offensive coordinator from his time with the Chargers, and he played really well in camp in the preseason. I'm kind of surprised Taylor Grimes is not here. I really am. I'm hoping that maybe this last practice squad spot here, because although it is only technically a 16-man practice squad, with Hagai Chisholm-Dubuisi, he's an international pathway player. So the Broncos basically get a free practice squad spot for him. So we can have 17 players on the practice squad because Hagai here is basically a free ride on the squad. So I'm hoping that this 17th spot is for Taylor Grimes, because he's somebody who I really thought the Broncos were going to try to sneak onto the practice squad. And the fact that hasn't happened yet surprises me. But then again, he could have just gotten usurped by somebody like David Sills. That's also very possible. Then they brought back Demontre Jacobs. That's really good to see. He's played really well for us in camp at offensive tackle. Good depth piece there. I'm glad that his injury that he suffered in the game against the Rams wasn't overtly serious, and they didn't have to waive him with an injury settlement or anything like that. Will Sherman's back, the offensive lineman out of Air Force. He can play guard, he can play center, he can play guard and he can play tackle, so a versatile player there. We've got the defensive lineman Jordan Jackson, who had a good camp, but he just got outshined by Elijah Garcia. We already talked about Hagai. We've got PJ Mustipher, who's going to provide some depth at nose tackle. Same with Tyler Lancaster. And I'm kind of surprised that Tyler Lancaster ended up signing with the Denver Broncos again, because it was reported yesterday that after the Broncos elected not to bring him back on the active roster, that Lancaster was going to potentially look for other options elsewhere. So I'm kind of surprised at the end of the day that Tyler Lancaster ultimately opted to come back to Denver. Then edge rusher Marcus Haynes, he's had a strong camp. Art Green, I'm a little surprised that he's getting re-signed. I actually had the Broncos just outright moving on from him. And then Devon Key, the safety and corner, he's played pretty well in camp, so I'm glad that we were able to get him back. And then some other notes here. We already talked about Tony Jones Jr. signing with the Saints practice squad. Offensive lineman Henry Bird signed with the Minnesota Vikings practice squad, so he's going to go out there with Chris Cooper and all those guys. And then Brett Maher, he signed with the Rams, so I guess the Rams were impressed with what they saw from him in those joint practices as well as in the preseason game. So they ended up bringing him in after he got cut after the Broncos traded for Will Lutz yesterday. The Rams ended up releasing their rookie kicker Tanner Brown. So this is definitely some surprising moves here on the practice squad, especially bringing in Philip Dorsett. That move definitely caught me a little off guard. And then Taylor Grimes not being here is definitely interesting. I know some people in Broncos country are going to be slightly disappointed that Montrell Washington isn't here, but I feel like at the end of the day, the best move for Montrell Washington would be to find another opportunity outside Denver. So I don't think that Montrell Washington was going to make the practice squad. There were just other guys on the depth chart ahead of him. All right, Broncos country, how do you guys feel about our current practice squad, and who would you bring in to fill that final spot? Personally, I'm hoping it's Taylor Grimes, but I'm curious about your thoughts. Drop those comments down below. I would love to hear them as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe to the channel. And until next time, guys, this has been another episode of Denver Broncos Syndicate. I'm your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.